Swooping in at number 5, we've got the Kamaitachi. You like your limbs, right? You'd rather they didn't fly off in the blink of an eye? Well, then you'd be best to avoid these wind weasels as best you can. Also known as the sickle weasel, the Kamaitachi usually roams around on whirlwinds in groups of 3. Sometimes they're brothers, sometimes even triplets, but the trio aspect is pretty much immovable. These little fuzzy flayers like to run around and cut people's legs off. At the ankles or calves is the usual choice, but you never know. Their method of slicing and dicing is pretty ubiquitous. The first weasel will knock the victim down, the second will come through with a sickle and slice the leg off, then the third and final fellow will run through, sew up the wounds, and put some numbing medicine on the newly stumpified leg. This all happens so fast most folks don't even notice their legs are gone until they're staring up at the clouds. Blink and you'll miss it. At first, the numbing agent makes it so there's no pain, but that will wear off eventually, and then you'll get to deal with the pain of having your legs hacked off and sewn up by a tiny mammal. Coming in at number 4, we've got Hyosube. Okay, are you ready for my quick description of this? You sure? Alright, this is an eggplant-stealing filth goblin. Doesn't that sound just wonderful? These short, hairy, dirty, humanoid things run around like they own the place and kill a whole bunch of folks as a result. If you see one, you die. And they don't do a very good job of staying out of sight. Hide and seek, this is not. They wander about just waiting for an unfortunate soul to behold them. As they live out their terrible little lives, they also eat all of the eggplants in your garden. Oh, you were gonna make some baba ganoush. Well, too bad! Hyosube say, "F your dip-based meals and f you too." All of the aubergines get consumed and they trample the fields for good measure. The jerks. The only way to avoid accidentally seeing one is to leave out some prime eggplants for them, and even this is hit and miss. For some reason, eating your crops and ruining your fields isn't enough, and Hyosube also like to use your bathtub. And like I mentioned earlier, they're very dirty little creatures. They're known for leaving behind ridiculous amounts of filth, like hair, dirt, and scum. To me, finding somebody else's filth in my bathroom is about an 8 out of 10 on the heebie-jeebies scale. So this is absolutely life-altering information. And by the way, you can't throw out the bathwater or it'll just kill you anyway. Honestly, I think I'd rather die than having to live with a tub full of goblin stink for the rest of my tenure. Coming in at number 3, we've got Tsuchigumo. Monsters have been mashed for as long as we can remember, and it's not always a graveyard smash, mind you. Sometimes it's the combination of many real, living creatures to make something extra nightmarish. Manticores, chimeras, ligers. Maybe that last one is real, but I bounce between Napoleon Dynamite and Joe Exotic for opinions on the mystical status of a lion-tiger crossbreed. Back to the Tsuchigumo though. This is a beast with the body of a tiger, the limbs of a spider, and the face of a demon. Part real mammal, part real, albeit much smaller arachnid, part mythical monster. Hell yeah, I want to fight this in a video game. But if I'm not behind an LCD screen with a super powerful video game avatar, I don't think I'd ever want to cross one of these. Apparently Tsuchigumo were known for eating travelers as they made their way across the countryside. In the remote fields, no one can hear you scream. 1 or 2 traveling morsels wasn't enough either. In one tale, a powerful warrior took one down and sliced it open. You know, to loot the body. We're back in the video game world, of course. And inside, there were 1,990 skulls. 10 shy of 2,000. That's a prolific people eater. Coming in at number 2, we've got Jorogumo. If you've ever seen the Spookies, you'll know that the best monster in the ridiculous mishmash is a spider woman. Now, the monster who drains the puppeteer dry and the Jorogumo aren't identical, but they do share the 2 major components of spider women. The spider part and the woman part. Deep analysis, I know. But getting trapped in a sticky web and having all your fluids drained, not fun. In fact, it sounds like a terrible time. For some. I feel like maybe some people might enjoy it. This is why arachnid gals are the worst. The Jorogumo is an ancient creature with depictions dating all the way back to the Edo period in Japan. Its upper half is that of a beautiful woman, while the lower half is hairy spider legs. We've all been there, right? It will lure men to a shack in the middle of nowhere, snare their prey in a web, and then eat them alive. Apparently, when a spider hits year 400, it gains magical transformative powers. I don't know what kinds of spiders usually live that long, but who am I to judge a creature with that much longevity? I probably won't make it till 50. In addition to some Jorogumo using their feminine charm to trap men, there are also versions that will manipulate good folks before devouring them. These spider women will show up with what seems to be a baby, begging for help. Soft-hearted people spring at the opportunity to help this poor mother and end up being torn apart by thousands of freshly hatched spider babies. You ever seen a spider nest ready to burst? Oh no, no, no. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Teke Teke, a more modern piece of Japanese folklore, but with enough scare factor and staying power to top today's list. This is the tale of a girl who fell on the train tracks and was cut in half by a passing train. Somehow she was left alive and continued to survive even when her torso was completely separated from her legs. The upper half of this poor gal stalks the night, attacking commuters and dooming them to the same fate. Sometimes she'll cut the train goers in half herself, using a sickle of some sorts. Other times she'll just force them onto the tracks so they can experience a train running them over too. One might wonder where the name Teke Teke comes from, and like a lot of Japanese folklore, it originates from onomatopoeia. See, this half-person's exposed spine scratches against the pavement and makes a very distinctive sound. And in Japan, that sound is characterized as Teke Teke. Yes, she's named after bones being dragged across concrete. That's hardcore. More than probably any of the other entries on this list, Teke Teke makes regular appearances in horror movies, manga, and anime. And it really feels like a modern tale too, much more gruesome and human. Plus, the member of disfigurement is based entirely in modern technology. As much fun as it would be to visit Japan, I'm also sort of worried that I would get chopped in half or tricked into being food for some god-awful beast. Although I suppose that's true for visiting anywhere that has some sort of folklore.
Alright, kicking off the list at number 5, we have Banshee, the Irish Banshee. Scream like a banshee, there's a line you've probably heard in movies or songs, but what the hell is a banshee anyways? I've never been to a zoo and then seen a banshee before. It's not something I've done. It's actually a reference to the woman of the fairies. Irish folklore says that if you hear this woman scream, that means a family member is going to die. What a harsh and gruesome warning. The Irish Banshee is said to live in the forest, but she still is connected to you. Okay, so the scream, her scream, can be heard from very far away. So yeah, it's a warning, a terrifying warning that's pretty loud. You're not gonna miss it. It's said that each family has their own banshee, which is the interesting part. She has a different appearance for each family, so there's not one specific look for her. I mean, some accounts report her to be super tall and lanky, like moi, where other reports have been between, 1 to 4 feet. And the wardrobe, super fitting for the tale. She sometimes rocks the gray cloak over the green dress, and other times she goes out in all white with the red hair. She will warn you of a death by screaming. This is important. But most of the time, it's said that she only appears with the descendants of the pure Milesian stock of Ireland. So surnames that prefix with O and Mac. What about MC? Is that close enough? Like Mick, Mac, O? Am I cool? Am I good? Like in X-Men First Class, the movie, we see one of the main characters named Banshee, and their powers are screaming really loud. So even in our popular culture today, this legend has still managed to stay afloat. What about you guys? Does anybody out there have their own Banshee that they want to talk about or share stories? Is your last name dangerously close to it like mine, McWaters? Let us know down below. And before we continue with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please give us a spooky thumbs up because it helps us pay the bills for our electrical chairs in the basement here, So thanks. Anyways, back to European folklore. Coming in at number 4, we have the basilisk. Originating from Europe and North Africa, the basilisk is a hybrid between a rooster and a lizard. How fun. It was born from an egg laid by a rooster and incubated by a toad. It's kind of like Jurassic Park, but more fun, more terrifying, I don't know, depends. But it didn't always take that shape exactly. So early accounts of the basilisk say that it started off as a small crowned snake and would simply kill by using its poison and evil gaze. Of course, you can't forget the gaze. And it even leaves a trail of venom, as if that wasn't enough. So you know where not to go, rather. In Christian mythology, the basilisk represents hell, yet some places it represents power. Like it became the symbol of the Swiss city Basel. It's believed to be the most poisonous creature ever, and apparently once it was killed by a spear from somebody on a horse, and the venom was so strong that it flowed up through the spear and killed the man and the horse. Not the horse? Come on, guys. Even the herbs around it died because the air was tainted of poison. And if there's a well near it, that water becomes poisoned forever. I mean, there's nothing a little crystal light can't fix though, right? Sip water, you're like, no, this one's tainted for sure. And then it became known as this large hybrid creature with a loud roar.
Do the roar.
You don't want anything. How about one of those famous Shrek roars?
Do the roar.
And of course, it's known to breathe fire. Another common interpretation is that the basilisk from Harry Potter. So in Chamber of Secrets, we see Harry fight the basilisk, and it takes on the appearance of a very, very large snake. Greek mythology always has the coolest stuff. Damn. It also appeared in the 2016 film Gods of Egypt.
And how do you know they have a weak spot? I don't, but they must, right?
In a much less exciting cinematic way than Harry Potter. I'd say. And coming in at number 3, we have the Genginger. Making its origins in Norway and Denmark, there have been many different depictions of the Genginger, of course. Always so many depictions. The most popular being that of a spirit or ghost of the recently deceased. Now, that just sounds like any ghost in general, right? But what makes the Genginger stand out is that its name translates to against or towards, and also a footwalker. So the name itself also implies to walking after death. People who committed suicide were usually the ones who came back as a Genginger. Or perhaps before they passed away, there was something else that they had to do in order to be at peace, so they went back to do that. Whatever the case may be, the Genginger usually needs assistance from somebody in the living world. Now that's where things get a bit spookier. See, in Scandinavian tradition, the Genginger isn't a malicious or evil entity, just a spirit that comes back to say, what's up, you know, how you guys doing? How's dinner? Are you still cooking? Nah, awesome, and then disappears. Whereas other traditions, it's like a violent thing. You know, you didn't want a loved one coming back in this form. It was malicious. Relatives actually went the extra mile to make sure that your grave was properly sealed to avoid this, or else you would get the dead man's pinch. Now the dead man's pinch, no, it's not a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and it sounds pretty scary, but you don't want to be on the receiving end of the dead man's pinch. It happens when you're asleep, because when you wake up, your skin would be blue and sunken, you know? Usually being attacked in your sleep means that you shouldn't be resting near a certain area. So maybe you're too close to a graveyard or too close to like these mountains. I mean, just throw a sign up, that works too. You don't have to pinch or bite any of us. So this undead zombie vampire combo would also break into your homes to spread disease. How fun. 6 feet apart, guys, come on, read the thing. Wear masks, space out. The tradition of the Genginger traces back to the early Viking ages as well, believe it or not. They're present in many of the Icelandic sagas, such as the saga of Eric the Red, taking the form of a mortal creature, and then Grendir is also said to have slayed the Genginger with his sword. Cool, it's always fun when you slay one of those. And number 2, the Liko. Heading over to explore some Slavic folklore where the Liko is otherwise known as the embodiment of all evil and misfortune. Now, if that doesn't sound horrible enough, their appearance is sure to get you. She's described as being an old lady dressed in all black, but she has one eye that peers out. And it's haunting looking, very. It's also known as a male that resembles a goblin, so either way, they're both not that fun. My personal favorite tale of the Liko is that some said it's taller than trees, like it's a cyclops almost, which is great. So what's the point of the Liko? Why the late night strolls bestowing bad fortune? Well, the Liko, and I'll keep saying Liko because I can't read, the Liko is known to be the servant of death. So during pre-Christian times, villages would conduct these rituals during times of epidemic, and a female-like idol would be built to be used as kindle to ignite a sacrificial fire. They thought, hey, if we destroy a version of it in the fire, then the epidemic would be dispelled. Then, of course, later on, it was linked to bad luck and death. The Liko is said to stalk its victims by perching on a fence or in a tree, just watching you from afar. And in many fairy tales, it's said that the Liko would jump onto your back and have its hands on you so tightly that even if you flailed around, it wouldn't let go. And while it was biting your neck, people would try and run into a body of water, hoping that it would drown, or at least let go. I mean, come on. And that wasn't the case. This was often the cause of their untimely death. See, the Liko doesn't cause their victim to drown, but death is usually the result of the victim trying to get rid of it. So it makes it look like it's your fault in a way. There is a tale of a blacksmith who encountered the Liko and made a pretty wild deal. So as the Liko was preparing to eat the blacksmith, he offers to craft anything the creature wants. So, of course, she asks for another eye, a new eye. The blacksmith insisted that the Liko be strapped down during this, because if she moved while the eye was being hammered in, it just wouldn't work out, right? It would make it worse, if anything. So once she was strapped down, the blacksmith took a red-hot poker and jabbed her other eye out. That's crazy. That's like some Bruce Willis stuff right there. The blacksmith escaped by pretending to be a sheep, so the Liko didn't notice him when all the sheep had left the shed. Gotta love those handy sheepskin coats laying around. And coming in at number 1, Fear Liath, the big gray man, and no, I don't mean Gandalf. Also known as And Fear Liath More, this one comes from Scottish mythology, and it's probably one that you've heard of in one way or another. It's known as a possible guardian of another dimension. Coming in at superhuman size, its dreadful presence can cause suicidal thoughts. The big gray man of Ben Macdui is said to be a distant cousin or somehow related to Bigfoot. That's why they look so big and hairy and similar. As they share similar appearances, of course, the mountain Dearg Due is home to this fantastic beast that you don't want to find. Many glimpses of the fear Liath have been stated that it's blurry, kind of like how all the photo evidence we have of Bigfoot is blurry itself. Many believe the cameras simply just weren't good enough to capture a clear image, but the blurry feature is said to be part of its ghostly nature. See, it's this tall, sinister, blurry gray creature. Science argues the existence of the fear Liath, saying that the appearances of the creature are simply an illusion caused by atmospheric conditions atop high mountains, where the shadows of somebody can be cast far away and look like this large giant phantom. So this ape creature has also been beloved to the missing link in our evolution. People think this is like the half man, half ape right in the middle thing. What do you guys think? The shadow of death itself, or just the shadow of Fred the mountain hiker? Which one? One of the common feelings you get when being in the presence of fear Liath is dread and panic. Now, many believe that this happens when you're climbing a mountain and there's not enough oxygen getting to your brain. That plus the anxieties of being on a mountain thousands of feet in the air, your brain will play tricks on you. But some tales are too convincing. One of the earliest sightings took place back in 1890 by John Norman Collie, a respected scientist and explorer who was walking in Cairngorms, and a heavy mist appeared as he arrived atop of Dearg Due mountain. This fog reduced his visibility, and he didn't talk about his experience for 35 years. That's a long time to keep a secret. That's wild. He heard footsteps behind him crunching that didn't match his own walking pace. And then he described this creature that he saw. It was large with broad shoulders, over 10 feet tall, with long waving arms. He also said it had an olive-like complexion, or rather covered in short brown hair. But in majority of these cases, the creature is only heard or sensed. So if you're thinking of grabbing a Polaroid and hitting the slopes, you won't be too lucky.
Coming in at 5, Black Annis. Black Annis, also known as Black Agnes or Black Anna, is a boogeyman figure in English folklore. She is imagined as a blue-faced hag or witch with iron claws and a taste for human flesh, especially children. It is said that she haunts the countryside of Leicestershire, living in a cave in the Dane Hills with a great oak tree at the entrance. At night she is known to venture out looking for unsuspecting children and lambs to eat, then tanning their skin by hanging them on a tree before wearing them around her waist. Legend goes that she used her iron claws to dig her cave out of the side of a sandstone cliff, making herself a home there, which is now referred to as Black Annis Bower Close. This legend actually led to parents warning their children that Black Annis would come and get them if they did not behave. She was also known to hide in the branches of her oak tree, waiting to leap upon unsuspecting prey. Now, in other traditions, it is said that Black Annis would grind her teeth, which folks would hear, giving them time to bolt their doors and keep away from the window. Otherwise, she would reach in and snatch them. It is also said that cottages in Leicestershire were built with small windows to deter Black Annis. She could only reach one arm inside. Coming in at 4, Changeling. A changeling is a human-like creature found in folklore throughout Europe, particularly British folklore. It was believed that a changeling was a fairy child that had been left in place of a human child stolen by the fairies. A changeling is typically identifiable via a number of traits. A fairy child may appear sickly and won't grow in size like a normal child, and may have notable physical characteristics such as a beard or long teeth. Now, to quote D.L. Ashelman, a human child might be taken due to many factors: to act as a servant, the love of a human child, or malice. Most often it was thought that fairies exchanged the children. In rare cases, the very elderly of the fairy people would be exchanged in the place of a human baby, so that the old fairy could live in comfort being coddled by its human parents. Simple charms such as an inverted coat or open eye and scissors left where the child sleeps were thought to ward them off. Other measures included a constant watch over the child. Now, in the Anglo-Scottish border region, it was believed that elves or fairies lived in elf hills or fairy hills. Along with this belief in supernatural beings was the view that they could spirit away children and even adults and take them back to their own world. Often it was thought a baby would be snatched and replaced with a simulation of the baby, usually a male adult fairy to be suckled by the mother. The real baby would be treated well by the elves and would grow up to be one of them, whereas the changeling baby would be discontented and wearisome. Coming in at 3, Black Shook. Also known as Old Shook, Old Shock, or simply Shook, this is the name given to an East Anglian ghostly black dog which is said to roam the coastline and countryside of East Anglia, one of the many ghostly black dogs recorded in folklore across the British Isles. Accounts of Black Shook form part of the folklore of Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire Fens, and Essex. Now, the description of Black Shook varies in both shape and size, from that of a large dog to being the size of a calf or a horse. To quote W.A. Dutt in his 1901 Highways and Byways in East Anglia, he takes the form of a huge black dog and prowls along dark lanes and lonesome field footpaths where, although his howling makes the hearer's blood run cold, his footfalls make no sound. You may know him at once, should you see him, by his fiery eyes. He has but one, and that, like the Cyclops, is in the middle of his head. But such an encounter might bring you the worst of luck. It is even said that to meet him is to be warned that your death will occur before the end of the year. So you will do well to shut your eyes if you hear him howling. Shut them even if you are uncertain whether it is the dog fiend or the voice of the wind you hear. Should you never set eyes on our Norfolk Snarlio, you may perhaps doubt his existence and, like other learned folks, tell us that his story is nothing but the old Scandinavian myth of the Black Hound of Odin, brought to us by the Vikings who long ago settled down on the Norfolk coast. Coming in at 2, Jenny Greenteeth. Jenny Greenteeth, also known as the Wicked Jenny, is a river hag similar to Peg Powler or Grindy Low. She would pull children or the elderly into the water and drown them. The name is also used to describe pondweed or duckweed, which can form a continuous mat over the surface of a small body of water, making it misleading and potentially treacherous, especially to unwary children. Now, Jenny Greenteeth was often described as green-skinned with long hair and sharp teeth. She is called Ginny Greenteeth in Lancashire and North Staffordshire, but in Cheshire and Shropshire she is called Wicked Jenny, Ginny Greenteeth, or Jeannie Greenteeth. She is sometimes described as lurking in the upper branches of trees at night, although this may be a folklorist's confusion. She became so infamous around Britain that she inspired a slew of characters in pop culture. Jenny inspired the lake monster Meg Mucklebones in the 1985 Ridley Scott fantasy film Legend. She is also the title character in a book of short stories, Jenny Greenteeth and Other Short Stories. She is also the main subject of a poem Welsh Maiden by Joel Hayway. She also appears in a number of Dungeons & Dragons adventure modules, including DDEX01 Tales Treat Hell, DDAL0401 Suits of the Mist, DDAL0406 The Ghost, and DDAL0414 The Dark Lord. And finally, coming in at number 1, Beast of Bodmin Moor. In British folklore, the Beast of Bodmin Moor, also known as the Beast of Bodmin, is a phantom wildcat purported to live in Cornwall, England, United Kingdom. The location became a centre for sightings after 1978, with occasional reports of mutilated slain livestock. The alleged panther-like cats of the same region came to be popularly known as the Beast of Bodmin Moor. One hypothesis suggests the possibility that alien big cats were at large in the United Kingdom and could have been imported as part of private collections of zoos, later escaped or were even set free. An escaped cat would not have been reported to the authorities due to the illegality of owning and importing the animals. During one occasion, a boy was walking by the River Fowey when he discovered a large cat skull measuring about 4 inches long by 7 inches wide. The skull was lacking its lower jaw but possessed 2 sharp, prominent canines that suggested it might have been a leopard. The story, of course, hit the national press before it was sent to the Natural History Museum in London. Now, in general, scientists reject such claims because of the improbably large numbers necessary to maintain a breeding population, and because climate and food supply issues would make such purported creatures' survival in reported habitats very unlikely.
Kicking off at number 5, the Questing Beast. And what better place to begin our folkloric journey than with the ultimate adversary of all things monster hunting in the long history of the British Isles, the Questing Beast. And yeah, whilst the name may be a dead giveaway, in folklore there is perhaps no other creature that is quite as bizarre as this one. Otherwise known as the Beaglatistion or the Barking Beast, this particular creature is a key monster in Arthurian legend, and in the forgotten days of King Arthur's Britain, his Knights of the Round Table, most prominently Sir Palomides and Sir Percival, made it their quest to hunt this thing down. As the legend goes, this strange creature had the head and neck of a snake, the body of a leopard, the haunches of a lion, and the cloven feet of a hart. The name, primarily Beaglatistion, comes from the great noise that it emits from its belly, a barking noise that allegedly sounded like 30 couple hounds questing. Bizarrely enough though, the legend of the Questing Beast is allegedly a variant of the mythological medieval view on giraffes. Do with that information as you will, but yeah, that's anyone's guess. Perhaps the most memorable appearance of the questing beast in Arthurian legend was in Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, where after he had an affair with his half-sister Morgan, they didn't know they were related at the time, just FYI, the questing beast appears to Arthur in a disturbing vision drinking from a clear and still pool. In that same dream, he sees a prophecy that foretells Mordred's destruction of Camelot, and he then intertwines the two. Later on, Merlin reveals to Arthur that the questing beast was actually born of a human woman, a princess who lusted after her own brother. Sound familiar? Well, in the legend told by Merlin, eventually the brother was sentenced to death by their own father and was torn to shreds by rabid dogs, the same sound that the questing beast made. Essentially, Arthur saw his own near downfall in a dream, and the questing beast was the result of that. Yeah, exactly. Star Wars ain't got nothing on this. Swinging in at number 4, the Dearg Due. As William Congreve wrote in his 1697 play The Morning Bride, nor hell a fury like a woman scorned. The Dearg Due is perhaps Ireland's most tragic and fearsome tale of that fact, one that is still whispered at grave sites and burials to this day. Surprisingly enough, in terms of horror, the Dearg Due is perhaps a lot more recognisable than we may have first imagined. In fact, loosely meaning red blood sucker, this terrifying visage of folklore horror is the closest that Celtic mythology has come to detailing the archetypal vampire. As the legend goes, thousands of years ago, she was a legendary beauty with blood-red lips and pale blonde hair, and her true name has since been lost to the ages, overshadowed by the folklore villain she became. As kind as she was beautiful, the Dearg Due was the envy of every clan in Ireland, and suitors lined up to win her hand in marriage. As fate would have it though, this sweet-natured girl fell in love with a local peasant, an equally handsome man who was kind and well-natured too, but alas, he was penniless. Eventually, the girl's father instead agreed for an old and violently cruel man to marry her, securing a fortune in the process. He kept her locked in a tower and had an affinity for making her bleed. Day after day, he tortured her, locked away in a tower cell, while she waited in vain for the kind peasant boy to somehow come and rescue her. That hope alone kept her alive for many months, but one day, when all hope was gone, she took her own life. As the legend tells it, the Dearg Due is buried in a small churchyard near Strongbow's Tree in the southeast of Ireland. But that wasn't the end of her. In death, she rose from the earth that same night she was buried, driven mad by the half-remembered visions of her own blood welling on her own skin, thirsty for revenge. As they tell it, every night the Dearg Due rises as the red blood drinker, hunting down young men in a blind and natural revenge. She calls to them in a strange, haunting siren song that lingers in their mind as they sleep, where they eventually follow her to a grave and she feasts on them. The Dearg Due is as tragic as it is violent, and it's a cautionary tale that leaves little to be desired. Next up at number 3, the Queer Hunnock. And on the same theme as the Dearg Due, there is perhaps no other female figure of folklore that is more terrifying than the legendary Queer Hornock. And this one, instead of drawing upon the tragic image of the forsaken daughter turned ravenous blood-drinking vampire, this one instead takes the visage of the mother. And not just any archetypal mother. No, oh no, but instead the mother of the devil himself, the fire spitter, the mother of all demons, and one of the greatest adversaries in the whole of Irish mythology. As the legend goes, when the planet was nothing but a swirling mass of vapour, water and rock, Queer Hornock was hatched deep in the molten core of the planet. There for eons upon eons she waited, patiently biding her time before we humans stepped into existence. You see, the fire spitter needed food for her children to feast upon, and guess what? We were that food. And in the early days of humanity, the mother of demons and her children feasted upon us in a frenzy. However, there is one turning point of this legend where something remarkable happened, and believe it or not, but the legend of Queer Hornock is actually inexplicably tied to the patron saint of Ireland himself, Patrick. Well, he went by Patricius back then, but still. Strangely enough, when the legend of St. Patrick is attributed to his removal of all of the snakes from Ireland in some folkloric canons, those very same snakes are instead the fire spitter and her children. As the legend goes, Patrick had traced Queer Hornock's home back to the cave on Station Island, which also allegedly served as a portal to hell. There they battled for 2 days and 2 nights before the fire spitter retreated through the swamps and poisoned all of the wells on her way. Eventually the pair fought in a great lake where the mother of demons swallowed St. Patrick whole as they both sank into the cold, shadowy darkness of Loch Dearg. Thankfully for him though, St. Patrick tore his way out of her belly and she was banished to the dark, miserable depths for eternity. Thank you very much, St. Patrick. Coming in at number 2, the Changeling. Because we can't really talk about Celtic folklore without describing some of the most prolific entities in the mythos of both Celtic and European culture. The Fae, fairies. In Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann and the Ail Shi, the people of the mounds, and a race of mythical and mystical entities that have since established themselves in playing some of the most important roles in Celtic folklore. In Irish and Scottish mythology specifically, the Tuatha De Danann were considered to be the people of the goddess Danu, the mother goddess, and later they eventually evolved into a far more supernatural design. It is said that the fairies of Celtic folklore could bestow great blessings and equally dangerous curses, and perhaps one of the most terrifying examples of that is with the Changeling, a fairy child left behind in place of a stolen human child. Now, although the theme itself has been used to explain away many unexplained afflictions, diseases and disorders of the time, the cultural significance of the Changeling, particularly in horror literature and cinema, has been pretty staggering. You see, it plays on one key parental fear of a child becoming uncanny, a split double of their former self. A changeling is typically identified by a number of unusual traits. In Irish legend, a fairy child may appear sickly or will cease to grow in size like a normal child would. In many folklore legends, these changelings grow notable physical characteristics. They may grow a beard or grow long in the tooth, literally. Quickly, they may display an intelligence that is far beyond their years, as well as develop the power of foresight. They will know things that should be outside of their knowledge, harnessed by the power of the Ail Shi. In some very rare cases, it was the very elderly of a fairy that was replaced as a changeling, so that the old fairy could instead live in comfort, being coddled by its human parents without them ever knowing. In folk legend, protecting oneself from a changeling was of the utmost importance, and simple charms such as an inverted coat or open iron scissors left where the child slept were required to ward them off. Beware the changeling, that's all I can say. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Balor. And truth be told, we can't really have any other creation of folklore as our number 1 spot. Balor, the big bad baddie of Celtic mythology, is a figure that features most proficiently in the mythos of Irish and Scottish folklore. Whereas on the one hand we have the mythical Tuatha De Danann, on the other we have the Fomorians, a supernatural race of monstrosities who shamble their way from the bowels of the earth to wreak havoc on we humans and engage in an eternal battle with the Fae. In Celtic mythology, this guy is the tyrant leader of them all. He is often described as a giant with one single large eye that wreaks destruction wherever it casts its gaze. Where have we heard that one before? Perhaps derived from the common Celtic word Balaros, meaning the deadly one, Balor is the be-all and end-all of destruction and devastation in the ancient history of the British Isles. Believed to be the personification of blight and drought, it was written in prophecy that Balor would eventually be slain by his own grandson, Lug, who would become the storm god of Celtic mythology and bring an end to the suffering that Balor wrought. From his fortress on Tory Island, in many myths and legends, Balor is described as a giant eye at the top of a tower that when opened carves a path of destruction in its wake. As many legends tell it, once open, it could destroy entire armies with a single glance. Although in many other instances Balor is a humanoid figure that walks beside men, as some folklorists described, he had a single eye in his forehead, a venomous fiery eye. There were always 7 coverings over this eye, and one by one Balor removed them. With the first, the bracken began to wither, with the second, the grass became copper coloured, with the third, the woods and the timber began to heat, with the fourth, smoke came from the trees, with the 5th, everything grew red, with the 6th, it sparked, and with the 7th, they were all set on fire and the whole countryside was ablaze. You see, whichever way you spin it, Balor was the personification of pretty much all evil in Celtic mythology and folklore, and when it comes to big bad baddies, yeah, they don't get much nastier than this guy.
Coming in at number 5, El Coco. The Coco, also known as the Cuco and Coca, is a mythical ghost monster equivalent to the boogeyman and can be considered a version of the bugbear, as it is a commonly used figure of speech representing an irrational or exaggerated fear. The Coco is a male being, however the Cuca is a female version of the creature. Now in Spain, Portugal and Latin America, parents sometimes invoke the Coco or Cuca as a way of discouraging their children from misbehaving. They will sing lullabies or tell rhymes to warn their children that if they don't obey their parents, Coco will come and get them and eat them. Serves them right. I quote, "Sleep child, sleep now, else Coco comes and will eat you." However, it is not the way Coco looks that scares children, but what it does. Like I said, it is a child eater and a kidnapper. It may immediately devour the child, leaving no trace, or it may spirit the child away to a place of no return, but it only does this to disobedient children, which is a damn shame. It represents the opposite of a guardian angel and is frequently compared to the devil. There is no general depiction of the Coco as far as facial or body descriptions, but it is stated that this shape-shifting being is terrifying to look at, often described as a shapeless figure, sometimes a hairy monster that hides in closets or under beds and eats children that misbehave when they are told to go to bed. Coming in at number 4, El Duende. A duende is a creature hailing from Spanish folklore that is reportedly somewhat human, with the term duende translating to possessor of a house, and was originally conceptualized as a mischievous spirit inhabiting a house. Now, in some cultures, duendes are believed to be helpers of people who get lost in the forest so they can find their way home. However, in some legends, duendes are known as gnome-like creatures who live inside the walls of homes, especially in the bedroom walls of young children. Always comes back to the children. They then attempt to clip the toenails of unkempt children, often leading to the mistaken removal of an entire toe. Now, the belief in duende are mostly found in the mossy cloud forests and mountain ranges. Like I said before though, the legend varies throughout different cultures, with some describing the duende as beings of small stature wearing big hats, whistling a mystical song while walking in the forest. Using their talent, they then lure young boys and girls to the forest, resulting in them losing their way home. Coming in at number 3, El Chupacabra. The chupacabra is a legendary creature in Spanish folklore, with its name coming from the animal's reported habit of attacking and drinking the blood of livestock, including goats. Now, its description, like most legends, varies slightly. It is purported to be a heavy creature the size of a small bear, with a row of spines reaching from the neck to the base of the tail. Some eyewitness sightings have been reported as far north as Maine and as far south as Chile, and even being spotted in countries like Russia and the Philippines. The first attack occurred in March 1995 when 8 sheep were discovered dead, each with 3 puncture wounds in the chest area and reportedly drained of blood. A few short months later, an eyewitness reported seeing the creature in the town of Canovanas, where as many as 150 farm animals and pets were reportedly killed. In 1975, similar killings in the small town of Mocha were attributed to El Vampiro de Mocha, aka the Vampire of Mocha. Initially, it was suspected that the killings were committed by a satanic cult. Later, more killings were reported around the island, and many farms reported loss of animal life, in turn leading them to believe the chupacabra had something to do with it. Now, the most common description of chupacabra is that of a reptile-like creature, said to have leathery or scaly greenish-grey skin and sharp spines or quills running down its back. Another common description of the chupacabra is of a strange breed of wild dog. This form is mostly hairless and has pronounced spinal ridge, usually pronounced eye sockets, fangs, and claws. Coming in at number 2, El Silbon. El Silbon, also known as the Whistler, is a legendary figure in Spanish folklore, associated typically with Los Lolanos, described as a lost soul. The legend first arose sometime in the middle of the 19th century. According to legend, the spirit is a youth who murdered and disemboweled his father for killing his wife, saying that she was a slut and that she was asking for it. Afterwards, his grandfather ordered the youth to be tied to a post in the middle of the countryside and lashed him until his back was destroyed. His wounds were then cleaned with alcohol and he was released to 2 rabid, starving dogs. However, before he was released, his grandfather condemned him to carry the bones of his father for all eternity. Now, the legend has a characteristic whistle, and it is said that when the whistling sounds close, there's no danger and the whistler is far away, but when the whistling sounds distant, it means it is nearby. It is also said that hearing the whistling foretells your own death, and you can hear it anywhere at any time. If you find yourself in that situation, the only thing that can save you is the sound of a barking dog, as it is the only thing the spirit is afraid of, that and the whip. The Whistler is also known to seek revenge on womanizers, so watch out. Now, the description has changed over time, with some versions saying that it appears as a giant of about 6 meters that moves about the treetops, creaking and emitting its chilling whistle. The legend also states that the Whistler can appear by a house on certain nights, drop his sack on the ground and count the bones of his victims one by one. If no one hears it, nothing will happen, but if someone does hear it before dawn, one member of the family will never wake up. And finally, coming in at number 1, El Basilisco Chilote. The Basilisco Chilote is a creature from Spanish folklore that is described as having the crest of a rooster and the body of a serpent. According to its legend, it is hatched from an egg that is incubated by a rooster and lives in a hole which it digs under a home. It then feeds on the phlegm and saliva of the people living inside the home, causing the inhabitants to dehydrate and eventually die. How terrifying is that? However, don't fret, there is a way to kill the Basilisk Ocholote. In order to do so, you must burn the egg as soon as it is laid and kill the chicken that laid the egg, to prevent further eggs from being laid. Once hatched, the only way to destroy it is by burning down the entire home where it lives. A little extreme, but honestly better than dying via dehydration because some little cretin is sipping on your excess spit. The myth itself is also based upon legends of Cola Cola and the Basilisk, but seems to borrow more from the tradition of the cockatrice, which is a mythical beast, essentially a two-legged dragon or serpent creature with rooster's head. Coming in at number 5, Ronwy. Ronwy, also known as Renove, is a Marquis and Great Earl of Hell, commanding 20 legions of demons. Whoa, that's quite the feat. Renove teaches art, rhetoric languages, and gives good and loyal servants the favour of friends and foes. Now this dude is straight up evil. He is often depicted as a monster wielding a staff. Not only that, but he is the taker of old souls, often coming to Earth to harvest souls of decrepit humans and animals near death. So if you're a fan of your grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, or people in general, dogs, cats, the neighbour's gerbil, perhaps don't summon this cretin into your life. Just a thought. Coming in at number 4, Kelpie. Originating in Scottish folklore, the Kelpie is the name given to the shape-shifting water spirits that inhabit the pools of Scotland. They are demons that appear as humans but also take the form of a horse. According to mythology, every lake in Scotland has a Kelpie spirit, even the Loch Ness. Some accounts state that the Kelpie have retained their hooves when appearing as humans, leading to their association with Satan. Now some have been known to be beautiful, majestic creatures. Others are known to prey on humans. Now, these beautiful creatures will kill you, so just like werewolves, Kelpie can be killed by shooting them with a silver bullet. Coming in at number 3, Lilith. Lilith is a demon from the ancient Sumerians and is truly one of the oldest known demons of all time, and that says a lot. Now it's highly debated where she first appeared. Some say in the Epic of Gilgamesh, yet she also appeared in Jewish texts around the same time. Lilith is often envisioned as a dangerous demon of the night, with a dangerous sexuality that spawned thousands of other demons. She's sexually wanton and steals babies in the darkness of the night. Not only that, but Lilith may be linked in part to a historically earlier class of female demons in ancient Mesopotamian religion. Coming in at number 2, Krampus. Oh, Krampus. Krampus has seemed to have garnered himself some fame over recent years, with Hollywood releasing a handful of movies about his demonic heinous acts. Popular in Germanic folklore, Krampus in essence is the polar opposite of Santa Claus. He has long horns, sharp teeth, and an obscenely large tongue. He is described as half goat, half demon, and on December 5th each year he comes for all the bad children, capturing them and taking them away from their parents forever, as opposed to his counterpart, Saint Nick, who rewards well-behaved children with gifts. And lastly, in number 1, Lucifer. Lucifer, meaning light bearer, is the demon most well known in folklore throughout all cultures. Not only that, but he's arguably the most terrifying. In biblical tradition, Lucifer was one of the seraphim that rebelled against God and was therefore cast out of heaven and into the depths of the underworld. Now, in some cultures, Lucifer is not equal to Satan, but instead rules over Satan, whereas in other cultures, they're both one and the same. In ancient Egypt and Babylonia, there are similar demons called Seta and Zu, both of whom were cast out of heaven as well.
Kicking off at number 5, the Kasha. And if you're fond of cats, which, come on, cats are awesome, then this particular yokai of legend may make you think twice about our furry bundles of friendship and despondence. In fact, cats in Japanese folklore are incredibly important creatures, and it is believed that as a cat ages and its tail grows longer, it develops latent magical powers, often turning into helpful entities or in some cases vile demonic entities. Let me introduce you to the Kasha, a particular type of monster cat taking the formation of large bipedal felines that eventually grow even larger than a human. The Kasha are often accompanied by streaks of hellish flames or bundles of charged lightning, appearing late at night during rainy or stormy weather, which has earned them the bizarre cultural name the Kasha, which translates loosely to fire car. And believe me, their namesake is just the beginning of the strange, unnerving presence of the Kasha. Being Bake Nico or monster cats, the Kasha live freely amongst humans, disguising themselves as ordinary house cats or strays. However, there is one cultural procession that causes the Kasha to lose all all sense of its disguise, revealing their true forms during funeral services, where the kasha will leap down from rooftops, snatching corpses straight out of their coffins to feast upon, carrying the deceased bodies away into the night, never to be seen again. The kasha are considered messengers or servants of hell, where they are tasked with collecting the corpses of particularly wicked humans, spiriting them away to the infernal depths for a lifetime of punishment. In some cases though, the kasha become so addicted to feasting upon corpses that they operate solely for their own needs, stealing corpses for their own uses, reanimating them like some strange feline necromancer with an army of shambling human corpses. Yeah, the kasha don't exactly make the best of pets. Look out. Swinging in at number 4, Mikoshi Nyuru. And if you're ever strolling through rural Japan on a particularly quiet road, you better hope to high heaven that you don't run into this particularly terrifying monstrosity. Mikoshi Nyuru, which literally translates to anticipating priest, is one of the most fearsome yokai in Japanese folklore, who often appear to lone travelers on empty streets or at intersections, lonely bridges, and often late at night. They appear to lone travelers as harmless traveling priests, kindly old men or monks of an average height, no taller than an ordinary person. However, if you don't perfectly anticipate the Nyuru's tricks, they can instantly become abnormally tall, often their necks growing to a massive size, revealing their long claws and hair like a wild beast, where they'll lunge forward and bite their victim's throat out with their teeth. In fact, this particular yokai is so oddly specific that the true fear of it comes from not understanding Japanese customs, by failing to understand how to defeat this strange, monstrous priest. You see, the only possible escape from the anticipating priest is to do exactly that, anticipate it, and before it can grow to its true size, you have to meet it face to face, eye to eye, showing no ounce of fear. Then you look from its head back down to its feet, and if this process is done correctly, the priest will be fully anticipated, which then causes its power to grow to a gigantic size to be sapped, where it is then said to vanish in anger, leaving the traveller to pass safely, and obviously your throat safe and sound and not bitten out by a giant old man. I mean, that's a good trick to know, right? It's pretty useful. Obviously this yokai originated from the necessity to look where you're going when travelling through the countryside, which is an important one really, because you'll never know who or what you'll bump into. Hopefully it's not the Mikoshi Nyuru, because it's scary. Next up at number 3, Yuki Onna, which makes up one of the many Onna of Japanese yokai, women who personify the magical properties of nature and the power of the elements, whilst also personifying the malevolence of perturbed spirits that seek vengeance on the living. Yuki Onna is perhaps the most deadly of them all, the snow woman that lives deep in mountain passes, appearing anywhere that there is heavy and dense snowfall. The Yuki Onna prey on travellers that are lost in the heavy snowstorms that often blanket the Japanese Alps during the dark heart of winter. Without a doubt, the Yuki Onna possesses an otherworldly beauty, with long black hair and piercing eyes coloured in a deep violet. Their skin is ageless, as smooth as porcelain and as white as snow. Their body is as cold as ice, and just a mere touch or the brush of a hand is enough to give a passerby a deep, unshakable chill. The Yuki Onna feeds solely on human life force, often sucking it from their mouths and breathing it into them with an icy breath that then freezes their victims solid, encasing them in a tomb of ice. There are many tales of the Yuki Onna taking the life force of her victims out in the snowy mountain regions of Japan, but perhaps the most bizarre instance is that the Yuki Onna sometimes fall in love with their intended prey, letting them go free and then taking them as their husbands. In some cases, as supernatural beings that never age, their husbands usually wisen up to the fact that they've unwittingly married an ice queen, where upon discovery the Yuki Onna will go on a rage-fueled rampage and break into the homes of all their neighbouring villagers, flash freezing every single soul in sight and leaving the village forever encased in an icy tomb. Yeah. You can't really win with this one. Coming up at number 2, Kuro Bouzu. And this one is pretty damn vile, and by function alone, the Kuro Bouzu is perhaps one of the most terrifying yokai in the whole of Japanese folklore, and there's not much that you can do to combat it either. Literally translating to black monk, a Kuro Bouzu is a dark, shadowy yokai of pure dark energy that roughly resembles a bald-headed Buddhist monk. However, those that glimpse the Kuro Bouzu often find its appearance to be vague and difficult to describe or make out. Its entire body is black and it wears black robes made of pure shadow. Its face resembles that of a wild beast with pointed teeth and thin slits for eyes. And here's the worst part. The Kuro Bouzu has a long putrid tongue that it uses to lick its victims in a process that slowly poisons them whilst they sleep, often over a period of days and weeks of repeated visits. And once it's latched onto you, there's not a lot they can do about it, really. The Kuro Bouzu haunt built-up areas such as cities and towns and thrive where there are humans. They only ever come at night, sneaking into houses whilst everyone inside sleeps, sleeps, although they're smelt before they're ever seen. A Kuro Bouzu reeks of rotting fish and vile garbage, and they exist solely to creep up to their victims, which are primarily women, whilst they sleep, where they then suck out their victims' breath from their mouths, sliding their putrid tongues into their mouths, ears, and over their faces. Yeah, exactly, I told you this one was vile. It is believed that the Kuro Bouzu didn't appear in folklore until the late Meiji period, which ran from 1868 until 1912, and the origin of its inception as a yokai was thought to be based upon a homogeneity of other more ancient yokai that had adapted and morphed their appearance to a more modern depiction. If that's the case, the Kuro Bouzu is much weirder than it first let on, and that's why the whole face licking thing and the function of its malevolent motives remain a bizarre cultural mystery. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Oni. And we can't really do this list without sticking these horrifying entities right at our number 1 top spot, because without the terrifying Oni, Japanese folklore may have turned out to be a completely different kettle of fish. Demonic fish, of course, because come on, this is the yokai. Whilst there are many different versions of the Oni, many of which could find their place on this list, the entire race of iconic demon men are without a doubt the ultimate villains of Japanese folklore and mythology, pitting themselves eternally against the forces of mankind. In fact, originally all of the spirits, ghosts and monsters of the yokai were referred to as Oni, where the root of its name means hidden or concealed, written alongside the Chinese character for ghost. Gradually though, as the canon of yokai folklore expanded, the Oni were reserved only for the male demons that are born after truly wicked humans die. The Oni are created when an evil human soul ends up in one of the many Buddhist houses, where they then transform into the Oni, ogreish and brutal servants of the great lord Enma, ruler of the infernal underworld. Now, unlike the familiar demons of Abrahamic mythology, the Oni that are more wicked than their other evil brethren are bound to remain on earth to terrorize the living. This is where the Oni of legend take their many different forms, as the fact of the matter remains that no 2 Oni are the same. Although that's not to say that they don't have their familiarities. The Oni have crimson red or dark blue skin, wild beast-like hair, at least 2 horns and fang-like tusks that protrude from their jaws. The Oni wear loincloths made from the pelts of great beasts that they feasted upon, as these demons are extremely strong and capable hunters, and in many cases the Oni that remain on Earth are also incredibly powerful sorcerers. Perhaps the most famous of all Oni is Shutenduji, the demon lord that was killed by the brave hero Minamoto Raiko. During his reign, Shutenduji was said to be responsible for thousands upon thousands of abductions, capturing young girls and imprisoning them in his mountain lair. Here, as the Oni lord entertained his other demonic brethren, they would feast upon the slaughtered victims, eating their flesh in massive banquets and drinking their blood like wine. Yeah, there's a lot to it, but as far as the yokai are concerned, they don't get much more evil than the Oni. Kicking off at number 5, the Genganga. And our first entry heads us off to Norway, Sweden and Denmark, as this particular undead revenant has been morphed and shaped into a few different depictions throughout the history of Scandinavia. Now, although the Draugr of Scandinavian legend is perhaps their most prolific of folklore abominations, and this particular entry functions in a similar way, the Genganga likes to do things a little differently. Derived from the prefix Gen, which roughly translates to forward or towards, and then Ganga, which is derived from a word meaning foot or walk. The Genganga roughly translates to walking after death. And I needn't say no more to give you guys an idea about where this one's going, right? As the legend goes, the Genganga were the corpses of the dead that had reason to return to the mortal plane. Usually, people that had been murdered or people that had committed suicide would return to their town and village after clawing their way from their own graves. Throughout the Viking Age, the Genganga were seen throughout several sagas, such as the Grettis and the saga of Eric the Red. Here, much like the Draugr, they were often slayed and easily defeated by their heroes. But in a more contemporary setting, as Scandinavia became Christianized, the Genganga became a sort of undead, violent zombie vampire that would break into the homes of their unsuspecting victims to spread disease. Whilst they were sleeping, they would attack people with their Dodin Keniep, which translates to the dead man's pinch, and when they awoke, their victim's skin would be sunken and blue, infected by the plague of the Genganga. That's not very nice. Swinging in at number 4, the Liath. And for this one, we're heading over to the most intriguing, captivating and equally terrifying kingdom of Slavic mythology and folklore, which, other than Celtic, comes in as one of my personal favourite European folktales. Because we've all got a list of that, right? Now, Slavic lore is mainly focused on the balance of good and bad luck, and the Liath is perhaps the personification of the latter as the cultural embodiment of all evil and misfortune. Otherwise known as the Licho or Liho in several other Eastern European countries, the Liko is often described as an elderly woman dressed entirely in black, with one distinctive, terrifying eye peering out of her darkened veil. In other versions, the Liko also appear as a male goblin-like creature that is often found perching on tree branches or farmers' fences, peering silently at its victim. That's a pretty creepy image, right? In ancient times, the Liko was often thought to be a servant of death itself, and any quiet appearance that it made would mark the end of their days for whoever first glimpsed it, and in many cases, even entire villages. During pre-Christian times, Slavic villages would conduct a ritual to ward off the Liko during times of plague and famine, where they'd carve a feminine-like idol with one eye and then burn it on a pyre in an effort to combat the malevolence of the native Liko. In one particular tale, a local blacksmith was beset upon by a Liko, but just as she was about to eat him, he bargained with her that he was a legendary crafter and could forge for her anything that she liked. She chose an eye, so she could finally have two to see with, and the blacksmith agreed. He told her that he'd have to bind her down whilst he hammered in the new eye so that she didn't make any sudden movements, and when the Liko was securely tied to the chair, the blacksmith shoved a red-hot poker through the Liko's one good eye. That's one way to do it, right? Next up at number 3, Liath. And whilst this particular entry may perhaps be a little familiar to you, it nonetheless still holds its own as one of the most intriguing cases of ancient folklore colliding with the modern era. In Scottish folklore, the Liath, otherwise known in Scots as Amphir Liath Mór, or otherwise known as the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui, this creature is said to haunt the summit and mountain passes of Ben Macdui, the highest peak in the Cairngorms and the second highest peak in the whole of the British Isles. Obviously, down to his incredibly remote residence, few encounters with the Grey Man have occurred in folklore, but those who witnessed him described it as an impossibly tall figure, covered head to toe in short hair, surrounded by a strange, uneasy fog. As word of the Grey Man passed throughout the Highlands, remarks about hearing a strange, otherworldly howl began to find their way into folklore, and it is often thought that the Grey Man was a part of a grouping of grey people. In fact, as you may have managed to piece together, culturally, the Grey Man of Ben Macdui has been the strongest correlation to the Native American folklore of the Sasquatch, all the way at the top of a mountain in Scotland. Who knew? The thing is though, although the ancient lore of the Highlands told tales about the strange giant folk that lived at the top of the peaks of the Cairngorms, this particular folktale still regularly emerges in recent times. In fact, dozens of contemporary figures have cited the Grey Man, with notable encounters beginning in 1891 and the most recent being back in 1958. You see, many climbers across the Cairngorms regularly warn of running into the Grey Man to this day, and the legend of the Liath seemingly still lives on. Next up at number 2, Koshai the Immortal. And this guy is equal parts horrifying and equal parts comically awesome. And in fact, Koshai the Immortal, also known as Koshai the Deathless, is one of the most prolific figures in Russian and Slavic folklore, often filling the role of the big bad archetypal male antagonist to many of their mythologies and cautionary tales. Koshai the Immortal serves as the masculine counterpart to the terrifying Baba Yaga, the woods witch that roams the wild in her hut built upon the legs of a giant chicken. Isn't folklore awesome? Although Koshai is a malevolent, formless entity, he often appears as a gaunt, bony, grizzled old wizard with a long grey beard clutching a sharp, serpentine dagger. In many folk tales, Koshai was depicted as riding naked throughout the wild on the back of a giant white stallion, searching for young women to kidnap and take back to his evil citadel in the dark parts of the wilderness. The thing is though, although his origins are relatively unknown, the most common proponent of Koshai's lore is the spell that he cast upon himself to make himself immortal. As the legend goes, Koshai the Immortal has buried his soul inside a series of nested objects that he has hidden far away on a remote island. On the island stands a tall oak tree, and at the bottom of the oak tree is a large oak chest. Buried inside the chest is a large hare, and within the hare is the corpse of a duck, and within the duck is an egg, and hidden within the egg is a tiny needle that contains Koshai's soul. Throughout Slavic legend, no one even came close to figuring out where his soul was hidden, and because of that he was free to continue his malevolent reign for all eternity. Also, a little side note, but in one of the greatest video games ever created, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, an evil frost mage named Koshai is the main villain. So there you go, another reason to play The Witcher. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Kuri. And this one is incredibly interesting because this particular folk legend comes from a very interesting part of England, Devon, an ancient place steeped in its own unique folklore and mystery, and perhaps its most horrifying folklore monster is the Kuri. As the legend goes, out on the vast and bleak moors of Dartmoor, many people throughout the ages were lured away by the mythical will o' the wisps, bright lights that transfix travellers and turn them to stray off the path where they would ultimately meet their deaths. By those ancient graves, a strange dark demonic creature known as a Kuri would manifest, where it would wait for passers-by and then latch on to their necks. Once the Kuri had you, over the course of several weeks, it would slowly convince you that it was real by whispering violent and evil thoughts into your ear. Sometimes you would dream of its existence, and as you dreamt, you'd feel a cold touch on the back of your neck. Gradually over time, its presence would start to become more and more apparent, and at night it would grab your leg, it would attack you in your dreams, it would change the face of your family members when you were talking to them into a dark, twisted vision of itself. The Kuri is a creation of pure evil, and it would never make itself known to anyone else, forcing you to question your own sanity. And that's when the Kuri had you. As you pled to be let go, it would start bargaining with you, and it will promise you that if you return to the graves on the moors, you'll be free from its evil grasp and the torment will be over. Well, of course, once you did that, the Kuri would tell you that the grave is just a few steps further, but eventually, of course, you'd never reach your destination, and eventually your body would succumb to exhaustion out on the moors as the Kuri kept you alive long enough to watch your body deteriorate in the elements, where a new grave would form for the next victim. Yeah, if you're ever in Devon, guys, steer clear of the moors at night. It's a nice place though.
In at number 5, the Wendigo. Also known as the Windigo or Witico, the Wendigo originates from Native American legend and is said to be a demonic half-beast as told by the Algonquin peoples along the Atlantic coast of the USA and Canada. The legend itself lends its name to the disputed modern medical term Wendigo psychosis, which is supposed to be a culture-bound disorder. To quote Basil Johnston, a teacher and scholar, the Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tauntly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash grey of death. Its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets, the Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from separation of the flesh, the Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odour of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. The most common interpretation of the Wendigo is that it's a spirit that possesses a person after they resort to cannibalism, whether that be under dire circumstances or not, and turns them into a Wendigo. They are also said to have an endless craving for human flesh and are sometimes said to grow in proportion to the meals that they eat, so that they never get full. Wendigos are known to have superior speed and stealth, the ability to mimic human voices, near perfect hunting skills, and in some cases the ability to control the weather. They are also known to bring darkness before dusk. In at number 4 we have Dover Demon. Originating in Dover, Massachusetts, the Dover Demon is a small humanoid that was subject of an intensive scare during the 1970s. When multiple witnesses came forward reporting sightings across the area. This monster is described as looking like a grey alien, except that it has skin of a rosy orange coloration. It has a large head on a small body and oftentimes travels on all fours. Its eyes are said to glow, sometimes orange, sometimes green. The first sighting begins at 10:32 p.m. on April 12th, when Bill Bartlett, Mike Mazoka, and Andy Brody were driving north on Farm Street. Bartlett, who was driving, spotted something creepy along the side of the road. Think it was a dog or a cat, he thought nothing of it. That wasn't until his headlights illuminated the creature. The creature turned its head and looked at the group, his large head on his stick-thin body, and his eyes glowing an orange colour. Now skeptics claim that the Dover Demon is simply a lost baby moose, which has been glimpsed under unusual conditions, making it appear humanoid. However, people don't believe this explanation and point out that all sightings happen during the wrong time of year for a moose that small to exist. In at number 3 we have Baba Yaga. Hailing from Slavic folklore, the Baba Yaga is a supernatural being or witch that takes on the form of an old hideous woman. In some stories she is said to fly around in a mortar, wielding a pestle and dwelling deep in the forest inside a hut that is said to stand on chicken legs. Baba Yaga has become one of the most memorable and distinctive figures in European folklore. In certain stories it is said that Baba Yaga may help or hinder those who encounter her or seek her out. In others she is known to kidnap children, threatening to eat them. In fact, many tales of witches living in houses made of candy or cake were named Baba Yaga. In some stories, heroes would venture into the wilderness to seek out help of Baba Yaga, asking for her advice or assistance in completing a quest. Sometimes she played the role of an antagonist, while other times she was a source of guidance. No matter the story, she always drives a hard bargain and will set out her conditions in terms of the agreement. All of her verbal contracts allow her the right to eat anyone who was later unable or unwilling to fulfill their end of the deal. Coming in at number 2, Dullahan. The Dullahan, also known as the Headless Horseman, is a type of fae originating from Irish folklore. It is said that this sinister being appears as either a man or a woman riding atop a black horse, but the rider has no head upon their shoulders. Instead, it is carried under their arm. It is also said that the head appears dead and rotten, with a demonic grin spread across its face from ear to ear. The Dullahan is also known to carry a whip made from a human spine, and sometimes pulls a wagon which is adorned with funeral objects. According to legend, around midnight on certain Irish festivals or feast days, the Dullahan may be observed riding a dark and snorting steed across the countryside. Storyteller from the Mourne Mountains once recounted his experience with the monster, stating, "I seen the Dullahan myself stepping on the brow of the hill between the Bryansford and Moneyscalp late one evening, just as the sun was setting. It was completely headless, but it held up its own head in its hand, and I heard it call out a name. I put my hands across my ears in case the name was my own, so I couldn't hear what it said. When I looked again, it was gone, but shortly afterwards there was a bad car accident on that very hill, and a young man was killed. It had been his name that the Dullahan was calling." Now it is said when the Dullahan stops riding, that is where a person is due to die, and when a Dullahan calls out the person's name, the person immediately perishes. There is no way to block the road against a Dullahan. All locks and gates are open to them when they approach. They are however frightened of gold, and even a single gold pin can drive a Dullahan away. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Teki Teki. Hailing from Japan, Teki Teki is a malevolent ghost/demon similar to that of the infamous Kuchisaka Onna, or the slit-mouthed woman. Teki Teki was originally a human who was bullied and in some stories assaulted, resulting in her jumping off a train platform onto the tracks and getting cut in half by the oncoming train. It is said that she barely survived due to the cold weather, with her crawling to a person for help. Instead of aiding her, they left her to die. Now Teki Teki's vengeful spirit stalks the streets of Japan. She often lurks in urban areas and around train stations at night. Since she no longer has a lower half, she travels on either her hands or elbows, dragging her upper torso and making a scratching, Teki Teki-like sound. According to legend, if she encounters an individual, she will chase them and slice them in half, killing them in such a way that mimics her own disfigurement. One particular legend goes as follows. As a young schoolboy was walking home at night, he spotted a beautiful young girl standing by a windowsill resting on her elbows. They smiled at each other for a moment. The boy wondered what a girl was doing in an all-boys school, but before he could wonder more about the girl, she jumped out the window and revealed her lower half was missing. Frightened, he stood on the sidewalk, but before he could run, she caught up to his location quickly and cut the boy in half. Sucks to be him. Coming in at 5, Garuda. Garuda is a legendary bird or bird-like creature in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain mythology. He is variously the vehicle mount of the Hindu god Vishnu, a Dharma protector and Astasena in Buddhism, and the yaksha of the Jain Tirthankara Shantinatha. It is described as a kind of bird and a kite-like figure. He is shown either in zoomorphic form or in anthropomorphic form. Garuda is generally a protector with power to swiftly go anywhere, ever watchful, and an enemy of the serpent. In Hinduism, Garuda is a divine eagle-like sunbird and the kind of birds. He is said to be a powerful creature in the epics whose wing flapping can stop the spinning of heaven, earth, and hell. He is also described to be the vehicle mount of the Hindu god Vishnu, as I previously mentioned, and typically they are shown together. Garuda's links to Vishnu, the Hindu god who fights injustice and destroys evil in his various avatars to preserve Dharma, had made him an iconic symbol of king's duty and power, an insignia of royalty or Dharma. His eagle-like form is shown either alone or with Vishnu, signifying divine approval of the power of the state. He is found on the faces of many early Hindu kingdom coins, with this symbolism either as a single-headed bird or a three-headed bird that watches all sides. Throughout the Mahabharata, Garuda is invoked as a symbol of impetuous violent force or speed and of martial prowess. Coming in at 4, Makara. Makara is a legendary sea creature in Hindu mythology. In Hindu astrology, Makara is equivalent to the zodiac sign Capricorn, which is my sign. Makara appears as the Vahana of the river goddess Ganga, Narmada, and of the sea god Varuna. Luna. Makara are considered guardians of gateways and thresholds, protecting throne rooms as well as entryways to temples. It is the most commonly recurring creature in Hindu and Buddhist temple iconography, and also frequently appears as a gargoyle or as a spout attached to a natural spring. It is generally depicted as half terrestrial animal in the frontal part and half aquatic animal in the hind part. Though Makara may take many different forms throughout Hindu culture, in the modern world its form is always related to the marsh crocodile or water monitor. Makara has been depicted typically as half mammal and half fish. In many temples the depiction is in the form of the half fish or seal with head of an elephant. It is also shown in an anthropomorphic with head and jaws of a crocodile, an elephant trunk with scales of fish, and a peacock tail. Lakshmi sitting on a lotus is also a depiction in which she pulls the tongue of the elephant-shaped Makara is meant to project Lakshmi's image as the goddess of prosperity, wealth, and well-being. It represents a necessary state of chaos before the emergence of a new state of order. Coming in at 3, Gandabaranda. The Gandabaranda or Baranda is a two-headed bird in Hindu mythology, believed to possess immense magical strength. It was the emblem of the erstwhile kingdom of Mysore under the Wadiyah kings, and after India attained independence, it was retained the Mysore state as its emblem. The bird is generally depicted as clutching elephants in its talons and beaks, demonstrating its immense strength. In the Chenakeshava temple of Belur, Karnataka, Gandabaranda, the two-faced bird, is carved as a scene of chain of destruction in which a deer becomes prey to a big python, which in turn is lifted by an elephant. A lion attacks the elephant and the lion itself is devoured by Gandabaranda. The Gandabaranda was later identified as a physical form displayed by Narasimha, man-lion incarnation of Lord Vishnu. After Lord Narasimha had slain the demon Hiranyakashipu, he clung on to his dreadful form. The Devas were even more afraid of Lord Vishnu than they were of the demon. In order to protect the entire creation, Lord Shiva incarnated as Sharaba, a part lion and part bird beast. This further angered Lord Narasimha, who took the form of Lord Gandabaranda, who fought Sharaba for 18 days and held him between his two beaks and ripped him apart, thus killing him. Coming in at number 2, Ahai or Vritra. Vritra is a Vedic serpent or dragon in Hinduism, the personification of drought and adversary of Indra. Also identified as Asura, Vritra was also known in the Vedas as Ahai. He appears as a dragon blocking the course of the rivers and is heroically slain by Indra. According to the Rig Veda, Vritra kept the waters of the world captive until he was killed by Indra, who destroyed all the 99 fortresses of Vritra before liberating the imprisoned rivers. The combat began soon after Indra was born, and he had drunk a large volume of soma at Vashtri's house to empower him before facing Vritra. Vashtis fashioned the thunderbolts for Indra and Vishnu when asked to do so by Indra, made space for the battle by taking the 3 great strides for which Vishnu became famous. Vritra broke Indra's 2 jaws during the battle, but was then thrown by Indra, and in falling crushed fortresses that had already been shattered. Indra became known as Vrtranan, meaning slayer of Vritra. However, the story changes in Puranic and later versions. As told in the narration given to King Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata, Vritra was a demon created by artisan god Vashta to avenge the killing of his son by Indra. Vritra won the battle and swallowed Indra, but the other gods forced him to vomit Indra out. The battle continued and Indra was eventually forced to flee. Vishnu and the sages then brokered a truce, with Indra swearing that he would not attack Vritra with anything made of metal, wood or stone, nor anything that was dry or wet, or during the day or the night. Indra instead used the foam from the waves of the ocean to kill him at twilight. Sneaky sneaky. And finally coming in at number 1, Sharaba. Sharaba or Saraba is a part lion and part bird beast in Hindu mythology who, according to Sanskrit literature, is 8-legged and more powerful than a lion or an elephant, possessing the ability to clear a valley in just one jump. In Sanskrit literature, Sharaba is initially described as an animal that roared and scared other animals in the hills and forest areas. In the great epic Mahabharata, this form of Sharaba was defined as a lion-slaying monster with 8 legs, eyes on the top, living in the forest and which ate raw flesh. It is also mentioned as residing on Mount Kuruncha, but not as a monster, but as an ordinary beast along with lions and tigers. Sharaba appears primarily as the incarnation of Lord Shiva, as a name of a monkey king in the epic Ramayana, also as a proper name of heroes and serpent Najas, and one of the names of god Vishnu as well as Buddha. In Puranic literature, Sharaba is associated with the god Shiva, who incarnates to subdue fierce manifestations of Vishnu. The man-lion form of Vishnu brings about the rivalry between the devotees of Vishnu and those of Shiva. Sharaba is portrayed with 2 heads, 2 wings, 8 legs of a lion with sharp claws and a long tail. Sharaba is also described as black in color with 4 feet downward and 4 feet uplifted, with an enormous body. It also had a long face and nose, nails, 8 legs, 8 tusks, a cluster of mane, and a long tail. It jumped high repeatedly, making a loud cry.